All right, good evening, everyone. We are going to, this is our last of the roots and results of anti-Semitism class. And so we're going to I'm going to give some information today, but I'd like to open it up for a bit of a conversation. Hopefully we'll have 20 minutes or so at the end to be able to talk a little bit. Because the real question that we want to try to get to today is, so what do we do? How do we respond, and how don't we respond to anti-Semitism? Um, okay. We still have a few more people coming in. I'll let you guys come on in. All right. So we've discussed the fact that anti-Semitism throughout the ages has morphed and has changed from its original inception in Christianity and in early paganism, in religious anti-Semitism, going through the Middle Ages with the blood libels and the Inquisitions, coming into the more modern period after Enlightenment with and Darwinism with looking at racial anti-Semitism, until we get into this new reality of today that deals with anti-Israel and anti-Semitism and sort of seeing the Jew as, or Israel as the Jew, and connecting this back and forth with Israel and anti-Semitism. And I just want us to understand that what is going on doesn't stop. And since we last met, so this week, 1 week, there were threats to Hillel leaders at Brown University and at the Rhode Island School of Design. There was anti-Semitic graffiti that was found in Dallas. There was the Lakewood church shooting, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in detail, that now is being shown to have some anti-Semitic connections as well. This is just this last week. And what's interesting is, I taught this class in 2020, actually. So 4 years ago, I taught this class, and I had 3 things that happened in the week prior. And, there was a piece of me that really hoped I wouldn't be able to do that again. And yet, of course, looking through, and I'm sure there was other things that I didn't even find, I didn't even see. If I really scoured the news, I would have been able to find even more. So what were these things and what happened and what is this new reality that we have, right? At Brown University and the Rhode Island School of Design, there were violent threats that were emailed to the Hillel leaders that were there. Rabbi Josh Bolton, who is the RISD Hillel director, said it was really disturbing. Specific threats to us and to our families and to our well-being. The exact text wasn't made public, but the police talked about it, and certainly Rabbi Bolton spoke about it as well. What happened in Dallas? So actually, at the home of council member Kara Mendelson, this was found. Baby killer. And this pile of red bags and bricks. And she's been public in her support for Israel. And this was what was found at her home this week of a city councilwoman. And what was interesting, right? We heard about this shooting at the Lakewood Church. It was perpetrated by a woman by the name of Genesee Moreno. She entered the church with her 7-year-old son and opened fire. Her poor 7-year-old son was actually shot as part of this as well, and he's in critical condition. She is deceased. And what they found was actually on the AR-15 rifle that she used was a sticker that said Palestine. And they found anti-Semitic writings that she has both collected and been a part of. And so they haven't really discovered why it is that she went to the Lakewood Church for this. But even in that, right, even in a church shooting, which one would think is not an anti-Semitic problem, it's an American problem, but it's not an anti-Semitic problem. Even then, anti-Semitism is connected to all of this. So how have we tried to respond? There have been a number of different presidents that have responded with executive orders. Most recently, actually, was President Trump. And he issued an executive order on combating anti-Semitism in 2019, December of 2019. It actually was a very controversial executive order because it seemed like the way the order was written, or some people accused that he was defining Judaism as a nationality, and the New York Times picked that up, that he was redefining Judaism as a nationality and not as a religion. And it kind of went back and forth. The reality is the executive order does not, in fact, define Judaism as a nationality. It was really kind of an example of how panic and lack of knowledge feed our problem that we have. But what was the executive order? What did he say in 2019? He said, let's use Title VI to combat anti-Semitism on campuses. Now, the reality is this wasn't new. He put it forward as if this was new. But in 2004, George Bush did the exact same thing. He issued an executive order under his administration and through the Department of Education and the Office of Civil Rights. And the OCR basically wrote as follows: groups that face discrimination on the basis of shared ethnic characteristics may not be denied the protection of our civil rights laws on the ground that they also share a common faith. So there seemed to be this push to say, well, Title VI was just if you are a race or racial discrimination or sexual discrimination. But if it's religious discrimination, no. And OCR actually came out and said, no, actually, you can't be denied if it's a faith thing as well. Thus, for example, it says on the bottom, OCR aggressively investigates alleged race or ethnic harassment against Arab, Muslim, Sikh, and Jewish students. So this was already back in 2004. This opinion was then sort of established or restamped by the Obama Justice Department in 2011. And a letter that was written at that time said, we agree with the analysis, the original analysis of all of this. And then the executive order issued by President Trump restates the opinion of the Bush and Obama administrations, right? So we're going to look at what it says here, the executive order, but I wanted you to understand this wasn't something that was invented just in 2019. There's actually a history of presidents on both sides of the aisle using Title VI to try and address anti-Semitism. He starts off by saying, this is the executive order that Trump put out. My administration is committed to combating the rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic incidents in the United States and around the world. Anti-Semitic incidents have increased since 2013. Students in particular continue to face anti-Semitic harassment in schools and on university and college campuses. It has not changed and only gotten worse. And if you skip down to the very bottom, it shall be the policy of the executive branch to enforce Title VI against prohibited forms of discrimination rooted in anti-Semitism as vigorously as against all other forms of discrimination prohibited by Title VI. So this was an attempt to bring federal law to bear to deal with anti-Semitism. We can get into a discussion of whether it worked or didn't work, whether it's actually being utilized or not being utilized, different conversation. But the law or the process is actually there to utilize Title VI to protect Jewish students, especially, but Jews who are being discriminated against as a religion, not just as a nationality, as an ethnicity. Okay, so that's the federal side of things, but we're not the federal government. So the question for us is, what do we do? Now, before I get to the what do we do, I actually want to get to the what do we not do, because that's actually equally as important. It's really, really critical. When I start to talk to people in the outside world, not in the Jewish world, about the Jewish response to anti-Semitism, sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. And we have to be thoughtful about how we fight and how we stand up and how we protect ourselves so that we don't make the situation worse. First of all, we cannot abuse the call of anti-Semitism, right? Today, anybody you disagree with is called a Nazi. That's a problem. That's a problem, because the Nazis had a very particular ideology, and it was horrific, and it was awful, and we need to stand up against Nazism, whether it was back in the 1940s or whether it's happening today. Absolutely, we need to fight it with everything that we have, but you can't call anybody that disagrees with you a Nazi. And we see that, by the way. Like, I see that in the Israeli Knesset, in the Israeli, like, ministers are calling each other Nazis. It makes no sense. And it's a problem for us when we do that. When we claim something as anti-Semitism, we have to make sure that it's true and it's accurate. How do we do that? Well, does it violate one of the 3 Ds? We talked about that, right? If it violates one of the 3 Ds, we can make a claim that it's anti-Semitism, demonization, delegitimization, double standard. Okay, now we can make a claim. Does it use the anti-Semitic tropes, right, that we now have learned about, of blood libels, of the Jews controlling all of the media, or all, this secret cabal of Jews who control everything from the background, right? Those are anti-Semitic tropes that have come from a long time ago. If it's using those tropes, then that's anti-Semitism. But just because somebody says, I have a problem with the method by which Israel is prosecuting a war against Hamas, that's not in and of itself anti-Semitic. And there are Israelis who have a problem with that, and Jews who have a problem with that, and those who don't. Don't use hateful language to respond. It's so ingrained in our nature that somebody slaps us, we slap them back. Somebody hurts us, we hurt them back. But bias is hurtful. Bias is a problem no matter how who's using it. So we need to try and keep ourselves from going down to where they are. Don't take matters into your own hands, especially if this is a bigger issue. I mean, obviously, if somebody is a friend who makes an ignorant statement, right? I've had people say to me, without thinking that it was a problem at all, yeah, I was buying a new car, but and they wanted a lot of money, but I Jewed them down. Now, they didn't say it because they were trying to hurt me as a Jew, but that was a use of an anti-Semitic trope and very much anti-Semitism. So how do I do that? That's something that I'm going to take into my own hands and be able to sit down and have a conversation with. But when you're confronting anti-Semitism in a school, anti-Semitism and those sorts of things, don't just take it into your own hands. Utilize the communal resources that we have: synagogue, ADL, AJC, all sorts of different organizations that are out there. Don't try to shut down free speech. As much as it bothers me, my fellow American has a right to be hateful. Doesn't have a right to threaten me, doesn't have a right to make it so that I am at risk, but has a right to say they don't like me, has a right to say they think that, you know, that that Jews control the media. He has a right to say that. Now I have a right to respond, but free speech is important in our world. And most importantly, don't give up. It's so easy just to say, we'll never win. They'll always hate us. We're just going to give up. So these are the don'ts, right? These are the things we shouldn't do. So now comes the question of, what do we do? So I'm going to bring two different modern authors who have written books relatively recently on anti-Semitism and kind of take from them. And then we'll open up our conversation that is a little bit more focused maybe on San Diego and the questions that you have. The first is a woman by the name of Bari Weiss. Many of you know her. She is an opinion writer and an editor. She was at the New York Times editorial staff until 2020 when she left. Different story as to why she left. She grew up in Squirrel Hill, Pennsylvania, actually, at Tree of Life, which was the synagogue that first shooting really happened. And she is the author in 2019 of a book called How to Fight Anti-Semitism. If you haven't bought it, if you haven't read it, order it on Amazon while this class is going on. I'm going to give you 3 different books to order, but this is one of them. What are her suggestions? A, tell the truth. Sometimes the truth is hard. Yes, there are babies that are dying in Gaza. That is the truth. Now, that truth comes within a context. But don't go and say, well, you know, that doesn't, it's not happening. No, that's not true. Tell the truth. Call it out, especially when it's hard. If you see something, say something. Don't let it go by, especially if it's ignorance. We talked about this at the very, very beginning, right? I define anti-Semitism into 2 different categories, and my response to them is going to be different. And I just had a conversation with a middle school principal on this, right? Where something happened at the middle school, and right, the question is, was that done out of ignorance or was that done out of intent? If my determination is something is ignorance, my response is going to be to educate. If my determination is that something is done out of intent, i.e. hatred of Jews, or an intent to be anti-Semitic, then my response is going to be to stand up and fight. And so, depending on what that is, we have to decide. So call it out, especially when it's ignorance. Trust your discomfort. A lot of times we say, was it anti-Semitic? Was it not anti-Semitic? Was it like, if you're uncomfortable, trust your instinct. And maybe ask more questions. What do you mean by that? Apply the Kippah or the Magen David test, right? If you are uncomfortable wearing a Magen David out, a Jewish star out, or wearing a kippah out, there's a problem that needs to be addressed. Do not trust people who seek to divide Jews, even if they're Jews. We need to deal and fight as a united group. And we need to bring in allies who are willing to stand and fight with us. Lean into Judaism, right? It's the more threatened we feel, very often, the more we need our tradition. Nurture that Jewish identity, because it will give you strength. It'll give you that sense of what you're fighting for. Right? When I sit and I enjoy a Shabbat meal and sing songs and light candles with my family, I think to myself, this is what I'm fighting for, to make sure I'm never in a place where I can't do this. Nurture that identity so we know what we're actually fighting for. The other person is Deborah Lipstadt. Deborah Lipstadt is an author, historian, Holocaust scholar. She's a professor of modern Jewish history, although this is actually a little bit old. I think she's still technically there, although you're going to see in a moment she's got another job, which is pretty much a full-time job. But I think she's still technically a professor at Emory University. She was appointed by President Clinton to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council, but currently she is the special envoy for monitoring and combating anti-Semitism. She was appointed by President Biden in 2022. She is the author of a book called Antisemitism Here and Now. For those of you who are a little bit more academically oriented and want to kind of really go into that history and what it is, this is the book for you. Barry Weiss is a little bit more popularist. This is a little bit of a tougher read. Not that it's tough, it's not a purely academic book. It's a little bit of a tougher read. She's also written Holocaust and American Understanding, History on Trial, My Day in Court with a Holocaust Denier, Denying the Holocaust, Growing Assault on Truth. This is a person who has been involved in this all of her life. And she reminds us of a couple of things. And you're going to see it's similar in some ways to what Barry said. Balance the oi with joy. Participate in a vibrant and joyful Jewish life. We Jews are really good at saying oi. Woe is us. What's the antidote to that? Engage in a joyful Jewish life. That's the antidote. Don't miss the forest for the trees. Don't get so deep in the weeds that we forget the larger picture of what's going on. And that works both for what is working for us and good for us, and also from the side of anti-Semitism, of, we get so pigeonholed into one thing that's going on that we actually miss the larger picture of what's happening. One of the things that we're noticing is that, and we've known for a while, but we haven't reacted like we've known for a while, is that those people who are trying to get rid of the state of Israel from an anti-Semitic perspective have been working at this for 20 years in a very strategic effort. It's hitting on a lot of different levels all at the same time. It's BDS, it's the college campuses, it's all of this is a coordinated effort. And we get so focused on one aspect that sometimes we actually don't see that we need to be responding in a different way. Recognize our allies and those who do good in the face of anti-Semitism. There are legitimate, real allies to the Jewish people. And we need to find them. We need to thank them. Whether they are people who are in Congress, who stand up for us and for the state of Israel, even when it is really, really difficult, really, really difficult. And we have, for the most part, good Congress people here, but I will call one out in particular, Juan Vargas, who has always stood with us, even to his own detriment in his party, because he believes that that's what's right and what he should do. These are the people that we need to thank and make sure that they know we acknowledge them. Mayor Gloria was just at the recent anti-Semitism symposium and spoke and has been an ally in speaking out for us and speaking out for Israel against those people that are deniers of, and those people who want to put October 7th as if it never happened. These are people we need to recognize and acknowledge. And we need to cultivate more, because it's not a fight that we can win by ourselves. So these are the pieces of advice given to us by two of our two authors who deal with this on a day-to-day basis. But I want to sort of talk to us. And before we get into the oi, right, what are the things that we can do? What are the things that we can how can we in this group come up with kind of brainstorm ideas that we can share with one another that you've heard or you've seen that can help us to stand up against anti-Semitism in any of its forms? Barb and or Neil.
Invite guests to Shabbos and celebrate Judaism.
Both Jewish and non-Jewish.
Yeah, invite guests into Jewish life in general, not just Shabbat, but into Jewish life. I'm actually, it's the first year that I've done it in a really, really long time. I did it when I was in New Jersey, but I haven't done it here in San Diego. I'm actually going to be teaching at St. Therese Catholic Church in March. We're going to do a Bible study together on Passover, on the sections in Exodus dealing with Passover. And then they'd like to see what a modern Jewish Seder looks like so that they can think about it vis-a-vis Jesus's Last Supper. Okay.
I think, as a rabbi, I think that's great. And we just had some realtor who came from a big mega church and went in our house, saw that we were Jewish, and said, I want to let you know our church really supports the Jewish people. And I just said, you know what, honestly, I wouldn't feel safe here without the support of the Christian community. So I thanked her.
So inviting people who don't know, because that's the education piece, right? Anti-Semitism is fostered, right? It grows with ignorance. So the more ignorance we can dispel, the more ignorance we can remove, the less fertile ground anti-Semitism has to be able to grow. What else?
Thank you.
What else? What can we do? Peter.
What do you think of the more radical Jewish groups like Guns and Moses and Jews Can Shoot? Do you have an opinion on those groups and whether they're positive or negative?
Look, I think we've learned throughout our history that ultimately, for as many allies as we have, and we need them in the fight, when push comes to shove, we can't depend on the world to save us. Hence, the state of Israel. Now, that can be taken to the local level as well, is to say, when push comes to shove, we need to be able to defend our own places and to protect ourselves. I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with it. I wouldn't necessarily, there are some, if your purpose is to defend Jews, I don't have a problem with it. If your purpose is to go out there and fight those people who want to, who are protesting Israel and make a big scene out of it, I may have a problem with that. Right? Depends what your purpose is. If your purpose is to say we need to defend ourselves, I believe everyone should defend themselves. And I don't think we can depend on anybody else. Michael.
it seems to me that both of the authors have the attitude that you got to be out there and upfront with your Judaism. And I'm kind of wondering how far you can go that way. And I'll give you an example. When October 7th happened, a week later, about 12 to 15 Jews accumulated at the corner of Encinitas Boulevard and El Camino Real, which during rush hour. So we got really thousands of cars going through that intersection. And there were people who gave us the finger and clearly thought that what we were doing, well, clearly they were anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, whatever, but the ratio was like 200 to 1, 200 positive hunks, go get them, versus the relatively few.
Right.
Is that something that we should do more of? Really demonstrate like the Palestinians demonstrate?
Look, there's lots of different ways. The idea is we need to share our story, right? Because the story that is being shared right now in some areas is very one-sided. Now, by the way, some people argue that our story is one-sided too. Okay. I mean, that's where dialogue happens, right? That's where dialogue happens. You need to be safe. And look, October 7th was unlike anything that Israel has experienced before. And Israel's experienced a lot, right? In the same way that 9/11 was unlike anything America has experienced before. It has changed everything in Israel. It has changed everything outside of Israel. And we don't even know yet, I think, how much it's changed. Because we're still in the middle of it. We're still in shock. We're still trying to figure it out. There's still things that aren't being told. There's still things that aren't being said. There's still hostages being held. And there's still a war that's going on that is creating suffering that needs to stop. I mean, we get it. We get it. So we don't know yet, I think, how the world is going to be different. And therefore, it's a little difficult to say exactly how we should respond. Should we respond by being on a corner? Maybe, right? If that shows the pride, should we respond by coming together in a vigil with 5,000 people? LA, I think LA got like 7,000 or 8,000. That's LA. And we're San Diego, and we got 5,000 people at a vigil. That's incredible. Our community. Now, granted, right, what happened in our sister region, and it's personal for us. But we don't know yet. It's going to be dynamic. It's going to be responding to things as they come. But it's also going to be knowing yourself. You have to be knowledgeable, because
Let me push back a little. May I push back a little on that?
Say it again.
May I push back a little?
Yeah, go ahead.
You had discussed in this class how a couple of times how organized the Palestinian point of view is. They're worldwide. They're organized to Congress. There's 10 to 1 at least pro-Palestinian versus pro-Israel, and so to say that we should just be respond to circumstances doesn't.
So let me clarify. Yes, thank you. Let me clarify. I'm talking about we in this Zoom, with a couple of notable exceptions who are actually heads of agencies that I'm going to speak about in a second. That doesn't mean that there isn't unified efforts and strategic efforts that are being worked on and put together by organizations like ADL and AJC and APAC and all of these different organizations that are responding and trying to get ahead of what's going on, right? That doesn't mean that there's not a fight. I mean, let's talk about local San Diego. There is a fight happening in the political realms here in San Diego of rabidly anti-Semitic people that are in positions of power, in positions of government and authority on the Human Rights Council, the County Human Rights Council. They were then kicked off, then they were then brought back on again. Like, there's fights that are going on, and there are people that are actively working to address those in not just a reactionary, but a proactive sort of way. But we, as Michael Frank, David Kornberg citizen, not as Rabbi David Kornberg, head of Beth, but David Kornberg, right? It's a little more difficult for us unless we become part of those larger efforts, which we can, to be proactive in that sort of way, right? Because we're going out looking for something that we're not necessarily going to have access to or not necessarily going to see. Elliot.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to push back a little bit on the notion that the Palestinian side or the anti-Israel side is more organized than the pro-Israel or the Jewish side of the debate here. I firmly believe through personal experience and as an activist and also on as an employee that the Jewish population, the pro-Israel population, is far more organized, far more effective than our detractors. What you see, though, is that they are far louder because of the way they choose to engage, which is street protests and bullhorns versus organized, effective advocacy, which they lag behind our efforts by a factor of 100 or more.
So I would agree. Here's what I will say. I'll split the difference with you, Elliot, because I don't disagree with you, but I don't entirely agree either, which is, I think in some arenas, you are 100% correct. Certainly in the political arena, certainly the United States political arena, that is 100% true. But I am seeing a fight for the minds of our young people that we're losing right now. And it's the college campuses, but it's outside of the college campuses. It's the TikTok. It's all of that kind of stuff that we are not responding to yet in the way that we need to, in the way that we actually respond to political issues in Congress and stuff like that, right? We don't have that same response. And I'm seeing many, many situations of our kids that have grown up here, that have grown up connected to Judaism and whatever, that are coming out and saying right now, I am very uncomfortable with Israel and my connection to Israel. And we're losing that fight right now. We're not as organized in that arena, and we need to be. We need to get there. And so yes and no. I'm gonna split that difference if I could with you, Elliot. Unless you disagree.
No, I think there is clearly a problem with the younger generation, and all the polls over the many years have borne that out. So yes, I agree that is a problem. And at the same time, all of the polls that you see about sentiment for Israel nationwide, when you don't segment out the younger population, is that America remains far more pro-Israel than the
100%.
other side. The problem is that they only mention that, or they only act on it when they answer a poll. We don't have the same. We don't have we don't have 10 million non-Jewish pro-Israel activists in the streets of America. We have a lot of good sentiment, and when you ask people, oh yeah, sure, I side with Israel against Hamas, but what are you doing about it? Most people are not doing anything about it.
Well, because most people, I mean, look, the reality is that if there was a war happening in, I don't know, Thailand right now, it's probably not going to be on my radar, right? it's going to be on the radar of those people for whom they have family there, that Thailand is important. Thailand is a part of who they are, right? And so, yeah, for a majority of Americans, it's not on their radar. And when it becomes on their radar, it's only on their radar based on the sound bites that they hear on one side or the other, whether they're watching, TikTok, whether they're watching, traditional news, whatever it may be. But it is a challenge, and what we're seeing is that step from Israel is bad to Jews are bad is a very short step without context. And that is what a lot of the younger generation is learning right now. They're not learning with context. They're learning Israel is bad, right? Israel is an oppressor. That's,
And
the interesting thing, I think I may have said this before, is right, for the white supremacists, we are not white and we are tainting the white race. For those on the far left, right, we are white colonialist oppressors and we are oppressing people of color. So how can we be both at the same time?
we're special.
Well,
Um,
that we are.
but did you see the Harvard poll that was done 3 or 4 weeks ago? It was rather
I don't think so.
surprising. It
No.
was rather surprising as it relates to the current Israel-Hamas war. Even that young generation that we're speaking of, a strong majority on Israel's side in this particular conflict, which I thought was almost jaw-dropping. And it was done by Harvard and somebody else, but I could look it up for you if you want.
Send it to me. I'd love it. Thank you, Elliot. Peter, and then Marka.
The biggest thing I found with kids in our area, once our kids go on birthright, they have a very radical change in how they feel about the state of Israel.
Well,
and
once
a wonderful opportunity.
Once somebody sees it for themselves and isn't making their determinations based on input from other people on either side, by the way, on either side. Like, I mean, I've had some difficult conversations with Palestinians who are living in Israel who talk about it for as much as they're Israeli citizens and stuff like that, who talk about the fact that there's racism, that there's discrimination. There are real issues in Israel. There are real issues in the United States.
Ethiopian Jewry, the whole thing.
Right. That's the truth, right? Let's go back to what they said of tell the truth. But seeing it yourself, as opposed to making your determinations based on what other people tell you, is always the best way to do it.
And the other thing that when we went through birthright training, they were trying at one point to be able to get American kids to do birthright so that would be their methodology for combating the BDS movement on campuses. And I think that's probably a very good positive that maybe we should be pushing our agenda on, that non-Jewish kids get to do birthright so they can see what it's all about. And maybe they become more of allies to us than they are now.
Well, I've always been a big supporter, and those people that know me and know how I connect to different organizations, I've always been a big supporter of taking some of the non-Jewish leaders on college campuses and bringing them to Israel. I think it's one of the best ways to create future allies. Let them see for themselves, let them understand that rhetoric is rhetoric, and we have to, how do we get through that and see the reality versus the rhetoric? Marka.
Thank you. First, I want to apologize for not putting my camera on. I have COVID, so
no, please. I saw your note. Thank you for being here in spite of that.
I moved here relatively recently from LA, and I've worked my whole life in the Jewish community up in LA. And after October 7th, I was drawn to do something specifically here, either here or go to Israel and help, because I've served on the Sarel program there.
Mhm.
And so you were asking, what can we do? I have now been volunteering at the House of Israel in Balboa Park, and that's something that I would encourage people to get involved with. It gives you the opportunity, gives people the opportunity to have conversations with everyday people who aren't connected with Israel at all, who may be visitors from various countries, and it gives an opportunity for a positive um, conversation with people that randomly, walk in. And I just think that's something that we can do, and I would encourage
Thank
people to
you.
do.
Thank you. Barb and Neil.
Oh, Rabbi, I was thinking of when people travel to Israel, this has always struck me. Israel is full of mosques, churches of different, faiths within Christianity, Baha'i, everything. I mean, but if you looked at any of the neighboring areas, you would never see that. So when you're there, it's clear that you can practice your faith, whatever it is within Israel. And I believe there is prejudice. I mean, I heard it myself, but you can still live in that country of it being any faith. I would say that anywhere around Israel, that's just not the case. You don't find synagogues. You can barely find a church because they're not very welcome either. And I wish they kind of just said that, like, here's an aerial view of Israel. Look at how many mosques there are. Look at how many churches there are, and take a view of any of the other countries around it.
Thank
It's
you.
a very simple observation.
Yeah, thank you. I am going to recommend, I think I've recommended it before, but I told you there were 3 books. The first one was Barry Weiss's book. The second one was Deborah Lipstadt's book. And if you have not yet read it, I've recommended it before. Noah Tishby's book, Israel, A Simple Guide to the Most Misunderstood Country on Earth, is absolutely a way to start talking about Israel from a way that separates it from the myth and separates it from the anti-Semitism, and talks about the fact that, yeah, there are some challenges. Okay, that there, it's a country like any other country, but what's real and what comes with the anti-Semitic agenda that is trying to delegitimize and demonize and create a double standard for Israel versus any other country in the world. March.
Well, I have a comment and a question. One is, we can engage in voting and be politically active individually, right?
Of course.
And like Naomi Harris just sent out a really important email today, saying, listing who we should be voting for if you're involved on the Democratic Party, who we should be voting for. If we could just get that out to a lot of people. I called one of my friends who's not Jewish and asked her to take a look at it and pass it on to people she knew that were involved democratically, a Democratic Party, not democratically, but in the Democratic Party. Because part of the problem is you can't just send it out because it could be insulting, I guess, people who had different party affiliation. But I mean, something like that to me seems very powerful, and to be careful who we're voting for.
Yeah,
that piece.
absolutely. That it makes a difference.
So maybe within the Jewish community, we need to do more to make sure the vote is getting out. And then my question is, how did it come up with anti-Semites is Jewishly connected? Because Arabs are Semites too. And I know that I looked it up because I was curious. In the State Department, it's definitely linked to Judaism.
Yeah, it's an evolution of the term, right? Of how anti-Semitism has evolved. The term anti-Semitism could technically be anybody from that area, but there's no doubt that it is the meaning behind the word is anti-Jewish. And by the way,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who are switching from using the word anti-Semitism to talking about Jew hatred.
I think that's more accurate, right?
So yes, absolutely. Melanie.
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook a lot, and I think we all know what's what's going on social media everywhere and how much anti-Israel stuff there is. I don't think a lot of these people that are posting this stuff, and I know a lot of these people, mostly acquaintances, don't realize how Jewish people around the world who are not Israeli and have nothing to do with the Israeli government are being targeted and affected as Jews by what is going on.
Right.
I get an email every day from the London Jewish newspaper, the Jewish Chronicle. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I grew up in London, so there's a lot of stuff on there, not only about what's going on in the US and Israel, but also in Europe. For example, there was an article today on the email about a Swiss ski shop refusing to serve Jews. So I've been posting a lot of this stuff from the Jewish Chronicle online so that people can see what is going on around the world for Jews who have nothing to do with what is going on in Israel.
Right. Well, and look, it's one of the things that we know. How do you know that somebody if it's anti-Semitic versus anti-Israel? Once you connect all Jews to the actions of what's going on in Israel, that's anti-Semitism.
Right.
I don't have a vote in Israel.
Right.
I can agree or disagree or whatever. We can have that conversation. But if you're being mad at me or acting out towards me because of what Israel is doing,
right,
that's anti-Semitism, because it's because I'm Jewish, not because I'm Israeli.
Right. And I've pointed that out multiple times because I think people don't realize that.
And that's sort of what we saw. I mean, there was it's happening every single day. There was a comedian that is known to be anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, and he actually got up onto stage with a Palestinian flag and told everybody to stand up in support of the Palestinian flag. There was a Jew who was in the audience who didn't stand up, and he was berated, and actually they chased him out of the audience.
Oh my God.
Because he was Jewish. And so that is what's happening, right? This is not a conversation about, whether or not Israel is using too much force, too little force. That's not the conversation that's happening.
Right.
The conversation that's happening is Israel is evil no matter what it does, and ultimately doesn't have a right to exist. Last comment, Barb and Neil.
I'm wondering, I think the narrative of all this has gotten away from American Jews and even Israel. The way it's being portrayed, so one-sided, it's really made it very hard to explain, what's going on. For example, today there was a small article in the New York Times about the tunnel, a nice graphic underneath one of the hospitals in Rafah, the Hamas tunnels right underneath the hospital, but you hardly hear a word about the tunnels and the infrastructure and hiding behind the civilians. It's just the one-sided nature of how it's portrayed. It's made it really hard on everybody.
Yeah, and that's actually a good segue to reminding people, and we've been speaking about Israel really as the focus. There are still a whole group of people that, the person who shot up the Poway Synagogue or Tree of Life Synagogue didn't do it because of Israel, right? And let's not forget that we still have the Goyim Defense League that's out there, that is a white supremacist group that is anti not only Jews, but anti-blacks and anti-LGBTQ and anti all of that, right? That's still happening too in the midst of all of this. That hasn't gone away. And the people that marched in Charlottesville and all of those sorts of things on the synagogues that are there, that has nothing to do with Israel. That has certainly nothing to do with October 7th or anything like that. That's there, and it's been there, and will continue to be there.
Rabbi, what I'd say on that is I'm more afraid of them physically, but I'm more disturbed on the other side. So you know, with the pro-Palestinian stuff, I can see what it's growing into. So it's disturbing. The other one, I'm afraid. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you have great security at the synagogue, and it's really probably primarily because of, you know, white nationalist supremacists.
Yeah, I'm not worried about somebody from, you know, the Democratic radical left of San Diego coming and attacking the synagogue. That's not, well, that doesn't keep me up at night, right? I'm worried that they're going to vote in such ways that are going to be problematic, right? But the physical threat is coming more from the right. Now, that's changed a little bit, right? We saw some in LA. We saw Jews being attacked by crowds of pro-Hamas supporters. So there has been some violence, but not nearly to the extent that you see on the right. And it's usually just a brawl, or it's usually just people yelling and screaming at each other, as opposed to something that's been planned out and thought out to create damage and those sorts of things. All right. I wish this class could end with, and that's how we solve the problem of anti-Semitism.
Mhm.
It doesn't end that way, unfortunately. This class is about awareness. This class is about thinking. It's about, what are you going to do when you see somebody protesting? What are you going to do when you hear somebody make a comment like, yeah, it was really expensive, but I Jewed them down, right? How are you as a Jew going to respond when you hear it? Are you going to call it out? Are we not? Are we going to wear our Magen David and our kippah proud? Or are we going to hide and say, look, maybe if I don't say anything, they won't notice me? Well, unfortunately, if the Holocaust has taught anything, it's that they will always notice you eventually. All right, my friends. I look forward to seeing you. I will say at the end, I said at the beginning, I will say now that starting on March 19th, I will have another Tuesday night class starting. It is much more uplifting than the topic that we currently have. It is called Midot for Modern Life. Midot are the spiritual attributes in Judaism that can really guide us and uplift us and let us live a full, engaged spiritual life. And so I encourage you to join me for that. You'll feel a lot better at the end of that class than you do right now. So I'm sorry about that.
Thank you very
All right.
much.
You're very welcome, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the
Thank
class.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Good note.
Thank you.